Once upon a time, there was a little girl. Once her rich father married an evil stepmother. She settled in the house with her 2 daughters. Their faces were beautiful and white, but their hearts were evil and cruel. And then came a difficult time for the poor girl. From morning until late in the evening, they forced her to do dirty work, carry water, heat the stove, cook food, wash dishes, and do laundry. And besides, the half-sisters did their best to upset her as much as possible. They mocked her, poured peas and wheat into the ashes, and she had to sit and pick them out. In the evening, when she was tired of work, she had to go to bed not in bed, but on the floor, next to the stove. And because she was always in ash, dust, and dirty, the sisters called her Cinderella. But then it happened one day that the king started a feast, which was supposed to last for 3 whole days, and called all the beautiful girls of the country to the holiday so that his son could choose a bride for himself. When the 2 named sisters learned that they, too, could come to the feast, they instantly began to dress up and preen. Cinderella also wanted to go dancing, but her stepmother did not let her go, because she had no dress or shoes, and she was dirty. And then the evil stepmother poured a bowl of wheat into the ashes and said that if Cinderella collected it in 2 hours, then she could go with her sisters. Cinderella went out into the garden and cried. And then 2 white doves flew in, followed by a whole flock of different birds. They swooped down on the ash and began to peck, and so they chose all the grains in a bowl. In less than an hour, they finished their work, and everyone flew back. Cinderella brought a bowl to her stepmother, began to rejoice, thinking that she could go to the feast. But her stepmother would not let her in any way. She turned her back on Cinderella and hurried with her 2 daughters to the ball. When there was no one left at home, Cinderella sat down on the floor and cried with grief. And then 2 white doves flew in, followed by a whole flock of different birds, and they threw off their dress and shoes shiny and all in gold. She quickly put on this dress and came to the bride. They saw her stepsisters and stepmother and thought that it must be some strange princess, she was so beautiful in her golden dress. It never occurred to them that it was Cinderella. The prince came out to meet her, took her hand, and they began to dance. And he liked Cinderella so much that he did not want to dance with any other girl. She danced until the evening and wanted to return home, but the prince asked her to see her off. He wanted to know whose beautiful girl this is, and where she lives. But Cinderella ran away from him and climbed onto the dovecot. The prince ordered to destroy the dovecot, but there was no one in it. And nowhere near could he find his beautiful stranger. No one could have guessed that Cinderella was rescued by pigeons that took her home. The prince was upset and went to the palace with his head down. And suddenly he saw a shoe, lifted it up. It was so small and elegant and all of pure gold. The prince guessed that when Cinderella ran away from him, the shoe from her left foot remained on one of the steps. The prince was delighted and ordered to find the mistress of this shoe, and to whom it suits he will marry that one. The parents returned from the ball. They saw that Cinderella was asleep in her shirt on ash, and a dim light was on by the stove. Both sisters went to their rooms, hoping that tomorrow they would be lucky enough to put on the golden slipper. The next day, the prince came to their house, and said that everyone who wants to try on the shoe of his future wife should come out. 2 sisters came out, and the stepmother locked Cinderella in the house and did not let her out. The older sister tried it on a small shoe. The younger sister tried it on the shoe as great. The prince was about to leave, but Cinderella climbed out of the window and ran out to him. And she put on a shoe, and it just fit her. The prince looked into her eyes and recognized in her the very beautiful girl with whom he danced. He took Cinderella, put her on a horse and rode off to play a wedding with her. And he ordered the sisters and stepmother to be locked in their house and never let them out of there. This is how they were punished for their malice and deceit. Once upon a time there was a prince in a distant land. It's time for him to get married. The king wanted his son to marry a real princess. The queen wished her son not just the daughter of the king and queen, but that she be gentle, intelligent, and graceful. And he himself wanted to follow the dictates of his heart. The prince went in search of the bride. After a few days of travel, he reached the nearest kingdom.
Hello?
The local king liked the polite and handsome prince,
Nice.
and he took him to his daughter.
Okay.
The princess was lovely. But after talking to her, the prince realized that she was very stupid, and there was nothing to even talk about with her.
Bye.
He apologized, said goodbye, and continued on his way. In the next kingdom, the king and queen were fascinated by the young prince and immediately invited him to meet their daughter. They took him to the dining room where the princess was dining. The young man greeted, but the girl did not even look at him. She was very passionate about her dinner. The prince thought the princess
goodbye.
didn't care about him. Saying goodbye, he left this kingdom too. The prince traveled all over the world to find his beloved. After much trying, he lost all hope of finding a suitable bride. The king and queen were very concerned about this. Still, they were glad their son hadn't married the wrong girl. One night, a violent storm began. It rained like a bucket, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The prince could not sleep, watching the flashes of lightning and continuing to dream of his princess. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. When the prince opened, a young girl was standing on the threshold. She was shaking violently as she was soaked all over in the rain. The poor girl was alone in the midst of all this raging bad weather, but even in the rain she seemed very sweet. She said that she was lost in the woods and asked to warm up inside the house. The prince took pity on the poor girl and led her into the house. He led her into the living room and sat her in front of the fireplace. The girl said that she is a princess from a distant kingdom. They were attacked and her parents sent her out of the castle with 2 soldiers. But during the storm, they were lost and the princess was left alone. It was hard for the queen to believe this, but she could not kick the girl out in such weather. When the prince entered the living room, she was already dressed in a dry and clean dress that the queen had given. She looked dazzling now. The prince could not believe his eyes. He fell in love. But at the behest of his father, he could not marry a girl if she is not a real princess. The queen realized that the prince had fallen in love. She reassured him and said that she knew how to find out if their guest was telling the truth or not. The queen went to the guest room, prepared for the young girl, and placed a small dry pea under her mattress. And on top, she ordered to put 6 more mattresses. Soon the girl went to sleep in her room. The next morning, everyone eagerly awaited the awakening of the princess. And when she woke up, the queen asked how she slept that night. The girl replied that she was very grateful for the night, and that she would sleep much worse outside in the rain. Despite this, she slept very badly and did not get enough sleep. And now her back hurts, as if she was sleeping on a stone. This was the answer the queen had been waiting for. She knew that only a princess could feel the pea hidden under the 7 mattresses. Hearing this and learning that the girl was a real princess, the prince told the king that he wanted to marry her. The king and queen happily blessed the marriage of their son and princess. The prince asked the girl to stay in the palace until the war in her kingdom was over. And he himself sent his troops to help save her country. They soon got married and lived happily ever after.